All right, everyone. It is 10 o'clock, so I will go ahead and get us started. Good morning. I am Taylor Post, Swiflin's office manager, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, What is Cataloging Ethics? And today's presenter, Dr. Karen Snow. Dr. Karen Snow is an associate professor and PhD program director in the School of Information Studies at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois. She previously worked as a cataloger in the Rare Book Room, University Archives, and Technical Services departments at the University of North Texas. She currently teaches beginning and advanced cataloging courses at Dominican University, both face-to-face and online. Please welcome Dr. Karen Snow and enjoy her webinar this morning. Karen?
Thank you, Taylor. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Glad you could be here on this apparently chilly morning in Florida. It's already chilly here in the Chicago area, so a little bit of our chilliness. So I'm so glad you can join. So here's me again, that's the typical slide. So if you do want to contact me after the presentation, please feel free to do so at my email address. And I come to you not only as, a cataloging educator from Dominican University, but also I am the co-chair of the Cataloging Ethics Steering Committee, which is an effort to create a code of ethics for cataloging. So we've been working on that for the last couple of years. We're just in the final stages of putting together that document through a lot of community feedback, and really excited about it. And I want to give you an update on that effort as well. So, okay, so I see there's been a lot of activity so far in the chat, which is fantastic. I encourage you to continue doing that because I want this to be more of a discussion than just me talking at you constantly. So if anything jumps to mind as you listen to what I'm saying in my slides, please feel free to post in the chat area, and I will be monitoring that throughout. Also, this is being recorded, and you'll get the PowerPoint slides after the presentation. I'll send them to Swiftlin, so don't worry about that. You'll get those slides if you want those slides, and the recording if you want to watch this again. So, all right. So what are we going to be talking about today? Cataloging ethics. Okay, let's figure out what that means, shall we? First of all, I want to talk about specific areas of ethical concern and cataloging work, kind of starting a little bit more broadly with kind of ethics and the profession generally, like librarianship, but then we'll get into cataloging specifically. I'll summarize some recent cataloging ethics research studies, as well as talk about some case studies for cataloging ethics issues and possible solutions as well. And then, like I said, I want to talk a little bit about the current effort to create a cataloging code of ethics, which we don't have currently. Some may be kind of surprised by that, but we don't have a cataloging code of ethics, at least for that's kind of broadly available, that's been adopted either nationally or internationally. So, so I'll talk a little bit about that as well as anything else you all want to talk about. Okay? All right, so let's begin. All right, so first of all, what I like to do when I talk about this is define my terms, because I don't like to make assumptions about what I'm talking about. So let's first of all just talk about what is ethics first before we get into cataloging ethics. Let's figure out what is meant, at least within LIS, Library and Information Science. What is ethics? Okay, so first of all, Wallace Kohler has discussed ethics in this way in his article, Professional Values and Ethics, is defined by the LIS discipline, is that they're generally perceived to derive from and serve as the application of moral principles. Okay, the application of moral principles. Michael Gorman, also very famous in our area, ethics are moral beliefs held by a group or community. So what is good and bad, or right or wrong, and a definition of those moral duties to do or not do certain actions that stem from those beliefs. Okay, so if we want to think about ethics, we need to, as they kind of like the one word that keeps popping up here, is think about moral principles, moral beliefs, moral duties. Okay, so, but I want to kind of dig into that a little bit more because I do think that's kind of loaded in terms of thinking about what's moral. So let's kind of look at that a little bit more closely, shall we? Right. So, and I oftentimes, when discussions of morals come up, values appear as well. So let's talk about values as well. And once again, according to Kohler, he says morals represent a set of mores, customs, and traditions that may have been derived from social practice or from religious guidance. So if you think about it this way as, essentially beliefs or attitudes that guide our thinking and actions, that sometimes is influenced by our religion, but sometimes by society and culture. Okay, so just kind of our ideas of and beliefs and attitudes. He also says about values that they're a subcategory of morals that enumerate specific preferred beliefs and or conduct. So it's just once again a kind of a subcategory of morals. Oftentimes they're kind of used interchangeably, but it's according to Kohler a subcategory. So the specific beliefs and or conduct. And then the application, Kohler says, of values is ethics. So taking essentially what we value, what we believe is morally correct, and then applying that. Okay, and so another term that's going to keep popping up as well, that once again is often used interchangeably with values, even though they may have some slightly different meaning. The principles are starting points for reasoning or guides for thinking and action. Okay, so I'm throwing a lot of terminology at you, and like I said, oftentimes these are used interchangeably. They have some subtle differences in meaning here, but once again, think about ethics as kind of applying these morals, values, these principles that are kind of essentially like our beliefs and attitudes, right? Our ideas that guide our thinking and actions. That's influenced by a variety of different things, right? Either religion or society, culture, etc. Okay, so even though it may have kind of that flavor of kind of like good versus evil, etc., I think that if we think about this in terms of kind of what's maybe good or bad, maybe more helpful in kind of thinking about this in terms of conduct and beliefs. So those of you here may be familiar who have seen this before, the American Library Association Code of Ethics. Okay, this is a very important document in librarianship, and you can see there's the link there on this slide in case you want to look at it if you haven't seen it before, but maybe you've heard of it before, but maybe not looked at it directly. But this is a document that kind of lays out principles of librarianship, principles or values that are expressed in broad statements to guide ethical decision making. So this is a code of ethics, taking those principles and values that are important to in librarianship and creating these statements to help guide decision making. Okay, so and so I like this phrase in the second paragraph: ethical dilemmas occur when values are in conflict. Okay, so I'm gonna come back to that idea because that's really important to remember in this discussion here as well, because sometimes our values, we may hold multiple values, but sometimes they may conflict in certain situations. So we'll talk a little bit about that. That doesn't make them any less important. They just may sometimes conflict, right? So in the ALA Code of Ethics, for example, it takes like a very important, one of the many important values or principles in librarianship, intellectual freedom, and it creates an ethical statement based upon that particular core value or principle. So, for example, we uphold the principles of intellectual freedom and resist all efforts to censor library resources. Okay, so this is, once again, kind of a statement elaborating on how we can work with and with this intellectual freedom value or principle. So, and these various ones here, there's multiple here. I didn't include all of them here, but I wanted to highlight the ones that I think probably most impact our cataloging work. Though obviously all of these in some way, shape, or form do impact what we do. But I thought these, like especially 1, 2, and 7, in particular, address cataloging here. So here, the number 1, we provide the highest level of service to all library users through appropriate and usefully organized resources. right? So then usefully organized resources, equitable service policies, equitable access, right? So like resources, etc. And then also number two, obviously the intellectual freedom. One, to resist all efforts to censor library resources, either by others or by ourselves, right? So, and then seven, we distinguish between our personal convictions and professional duties and do not allow our personal beliefs to interfere with fair representation of the aims of our institutions or the provision of access to their information resources. So, right, so the metadata we create, we want to try to be as unbiased as possible and not try to insert our own personal opinions into the metadata we create. But once again, you can see how this kind of applies across our profession. It's not specific to cataloging, which is fine. Catalogers are also librarians, so this is good. But there's some gaps, right? As for those who are cataloging on a regular basis, there are things that would be nice to have some further guidance on. So some questions, right? So what are some areas of focus for catalogers? So we kind of talked about a few of those from the ALA Code of Ethics, but what beyond? What is there beyond the ALA Code of Ethics that we in the cataloging world need to paying close attention to? Okay, so is my question. So we do have other documents out there that help with this. We do have IFLA's Statement of International Cataloging Principles, okay, which was most recently updated in 2016. And this does directly address cataloging work. It says here, the following principles direct the construction and development of cataloging codes, the decisions that catalogers make, and policies on access to and exchange data, and then the convenience of the users, the highest principle they have. So, and these are great. Once again, it's more cataloging specific, but these are principles that they have. So presumably this is an ethical document of ethical statements, but the only time they use the word ethics at all in this document is in reference to another document, the EFLA Code of Ethics for librarians and other information workers. So just like, ALA has a code of ethics, IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, they have their own as well. So we do have multiple documents out there that help us with our ethical decisions, but they don't actually ever really discuss these principles in terms of ethics, though the assumption is that these are kind of, part of ethics as well. So that's the assumption. They just don't kind of frame it in quite that way. Okay. So with that in mind, with these documents, my co-chair of the Cataloging Ethics Steering Committee and also my research partner, Beth Shoemaker from Emory University, we recently conducted a study and we published kind of the first part of it. We're trying to publish the second part probably next year. We gathered data. We put out a questionnaire gathering data from practicing catalogers on how they define cataloging ethics. And yes, we asked them, how do you define cataloging ethics and what do you think are the greatest cataloging ethical issues in your work? Okay, essentially in a nutshell, that's what we asked them. We just wanted to get a sense of practitioners' views on what is cataloging ethics. Well, first of all, we asked them, do you think there is such a thing? Because there is such a thing as cataloging ethics, because I know that not everyone agrees that there are ethical issues in cataloging. And so we wanted to find that out as well. And there's some people who said no. But the vast majority of people did say that yes, there is cataloging ethics, there are cataloging ethical issues. And we asked them to define it. So what do you think of when you think of cataloging ethics? And so some major themes that we determined from those responses are these. Okay, and these are in order of how often they're mentioned in the definitions that were provided on this questionnaire. Most of the participants in this study said that access is a major part of cataloging ethics, which we've seen right from that ALA Code of Ethics and other documents. And oftentimes they discussed access in terms of just not censoring resources or information, the accessibility of the resource as well as metadata. So, right, so not just the resource itself, but the accessibility of metadata, and also the timely processing of resources. So, in other words, most of the time when people think about cataloging ethics, this is one of the major aspects of that pops up as access. Also, people talked a lot about bias in their definitions, just kind of being aware of your own bias, attempting to be neutral at least, and then keeping one's own personal opinions out of cataloging work. Obviously, there's going to be some overlap here. These are not mutually exclusive categories like access and bias. There's going to be some overlap there, right? Because if you're biased and you don't keep your personal opinions out of cataloging work, then access may be impacted. But this is kind of the second most common theme that we found in definitions, is this kind of concern over bias and how we can keep it out of our work. Also, accurate representation was an important category of definitions that cataloging resources as well as agents, right? So kind of like describing people, authors, etc. We want to catalog them as they present themselves without judgment or misrepresenting the content. So just accurate representation of the resources as well as these agents. And then justice. So that's just kind of a term that we use to describe people who talk about how we need to be aware of and attempt to rectify social injustices through our work, the desire for metadata to be inclusive, and just being conscientious about the impact of our work on users as well as creators. Okay, so we just kind of put that in this kind of overarching category of justice when people discussed cataloging ethics in this way. So these are the kind of the top categories of definitions we found in our study, but there are others as well. So people also just kind of define cataloging ethics like they would, that just kind of essentially following like the ALA Code of Ethics, for example. They're just kind of talking about it as like morals, values, general guidelines relating to cataloging work that may be aspirational or just relate to librarian ethics more generally. In addition, there was a discussion of in order to be ethical in cataloging work, you have to follow standards and be aware of them. So just awareness of local, national, and or international standards, and then using them consistently and accurately. However, also there, and actually sometimes in the same definition, the participants said that not only do we need to follow them, but we need to question them. Okay, that we don't need to follow them that closely if we feel that it is not serving our users in the way it should, or not being respectful of others. So it's standards such as like RDA and LCSH. There's terminology there that like Library of Congress subject headings, for example, says to use, and it's not something you feel is respectful, then questioning that, like either just modifying it at the local level or trying to change the standard. And also just recognizing that standards are biased. Okay, so we had multiple, obviously standards, a big part of cataloging that's not always discussed in these other more general code of ethics that we see in librarianship, but that's important to us, right, in the cataloging world. And then finally, kind of lesser ones that are discussed, and I thought was really quite interesting, is that we had quite a few people who define cataloging ethics as just what we do. It's just like our work, just the decisions we make during the course of our work, which I thought was really interesting. That's very broad, and thought that was just really interesting. But also some just said, I don't know, right? I'm not sure, haven't thought about it. And then just we have a bunch of other ones, other categories and other answers that just didn't, fit comfortably into the other categories as well. So lots. We had a lot of not necessarily disagreements, but just kind of different emphasis, right, on different things. So which I thought was really interesting. So what we did is we kind of looked at this and synthesized this into what we felt, at least according to our participants' answers. Okay, so we're not trying to impose this on the entire on the entirety of the profession, but just based upon those that participated in our study, the cataloging values that we found, the kind of threads throughout these answers are these, all right? So once again, accessibility of resources and metadata, really important, in our profession, awareness of our own personal as well as institutional and standards bias. We value inclusive metadata and actions, accurate representation of resources and agents, as well as adhering to standards while interrogating their usefulness. Okay, so these were kind of, like I said, kind of the major threads that kind of wove throughout the responses on our study. So, which once again, there's going to be some overlap there with kind of the general code of ethics for librarianship, but some, not. So Chris, I'm saying, so the subject heading change has been considered by LC, NOCLC, so illegal immigrants, right? Okay, so I thank you for bringing that up because I'm gonna be talking about that. No good cataloging ethics discussion can be had without discussing that Library of Congress subject heading. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind for now. We will circle back to that. I promise. I promise. Because I oftentimes I do think that that's those types of things like the subject headings. That's a lot of what people think about when they think, oh, cataloging ethics. It's just about making sure that we have the respectful and inclusive subject headings. But I'm going to make the argument that that's not, even though that's part of it, that's just a very small part of it. Okay, so we'll come back to that. All right. All right. So in fact, that this is kind of the heart of this, is that I want to discuss and have us think about what is and is not an ethical issue in cataloging work. Okay, because this is we could this could confuse a lot of what we do. So in this, I'm going to bring up this Venn diagram for those who are into Venns. Here we go. We got a Venn. So because I think traditionally we think of cataloging here and this one little blue circle here, and we have ethics over here, and then we have cataloging ethics in the in between, the little slice there, right? There's a lot of what we do. There's just day-to-day stuff that we describe stuff. We encode it, right, using a metadata standard. There's a lot of things that we do that's not necessarily within the ethical realm. Okay, and so, but there is this slice that there is that we need to pay close attention to. Okay, that's really it's an ethical impact on us and as well as our users and the resources we describe. I want to make the argument that this is not an appropriate way to think about what we do. I think that what we need to do is think about what we do always through an ethical lens. Okay, that really all of our work can have an ethical impact in some way. Okay, so I'm going to try to make that argument, and we'll see. I'm curious to see what you think about that. But I'll see what you have to think about that. So, okay. So, discussion is already saying there is, it's typically subject headings, right? It's subject access that people think of when they think of cataloging ethics. And this is a conversation we've been having for quite some time. Some people more than others, like Sandy Berman, has been kind of the major voice since the 1960s on trying to draw attention to bias, specifically for the most part in Library of Congress subject headings, but other places as well. And he was not the only one, but he was just the most vocal critic. And in fact, you can access his major work in this area, Prejudices and Antipathies, that came out in the 1970s, actually. The 1993 edition is available for free online. This link you can find here. But he really has done probably the most overall in terms of getting Library of Congress to pay more attention to these subject headings that they're creating that have been fairly offensive, quite frankly, to many racial, ethnic, and religious groups, as well as others. Okay, so because it's still not always great, the subject terms that are included, but it's definitely much better than it used to be. But not everyone at the time agreed with this. For example, Seymour Libetsky, probably one of the more famous catalogers of the 20th century, he's the one behind the Paris Principles. For those, that name sounds familiar, but I'm not sure. So, behind the Paris Principles, he actually wrote the review of Berman's book, Prejudices and Antipathies. And even though he largely agreed with Berman, he felt like some of his arguments did not ring true, just because he felt like what catalogers are doing is they're just applying these subject headings that are actually represented in the published works. Okay, so as it says here, a good catalog reflects faithfully the face of the literature represented by it, warts and all. And if that face is not pleasant to behold, it is not the mirror that is to blame. Okay, which I love that quote. So essentially, kind of relieving us of our duty that we're just kind of we're just transcribing the terms that are used in the work itself. And once again, there are many arguments saying that that's not completely accurate. That sometimes these works don't use these specific terms. It's us as humans, and Library of Congress is, including humans that create this list. They make judgment calls on this. Okay, so just as an example, just one example, and Hope Olson's also extremely important work, The Power to Name. She discusses this woman's situation where Mariella Fifina, she went into a library and consulted a catalog, and she tried to find works on the topic of access to information by a Latina or Latino, and found that the Library of Congress subject heading for that topic was libraries and the socially handicapped. It actually had been changed because it used to be the library service to the culturally handicapped. So presumably, maybe these terms are actually used in the literature itself. But for the most part, I think that what's happening is that those creating these vocabularies, they're kind of once again inserting some of their own personal judgment and bias into these. And so this obviously kind of others those who don't fit within specific categories that are deemed to be kind of quote unquote normal. Okay, so and like I said, Library of Congress subject headings has kind of bared the brunt of this criticism, and fairly, in my opinion, just because they have been not great in the past. But like I said, that's been better lately, I think, just because there's been a lot more people paying closer attention, and Library of Congress has been much better about allowing more community input, right, and creating, modifying subject headings and creating new ones. So we'll come back to that as well. But this is, so Christopher was talking about the illegal alien controversy. This is what he's talking about. And this is just kind of a quick write-up from the New York Times about it. But essentially, in a nutshell, what this is about for those who are not familiar is that illegal aliens is the Library of Congress subject heading that represents like undocumented immigrants, right? That class of person. And illegal aliens is in like the U.S. legal code. So in Library of Congress is the Library of Congress, right? It's primarily for like governments and scholars, and so it uses U.S. legal terms. And a couple of years ago, even though this is something that's been on the radar, I think, of catalogers for a while, it was Dartmouth students who initiated this kind of campaign to get this subject heading changed. Okay, and so they put in with the help of a cataloger at Dartmouth, they put in a proposal to the Library of Congress to get it changed. It was rejected by Library of Congress for the reasons I just explained, because it's it's from in the legal code. But then eventually, under a lot of pressure from the American Library Association, Library of Congress did agree to change it. Actually, it was two. It was like there were two headings. Sorry, I forget what they were. But so instead of just having illegal aliens, there was then two headings that were included. But then this was around 2016, and there was some pressure also from the U.S. government to not do this. This is one of the very, very rare instances where the United States government actually inserted itself into cataloging issues. And so Library of Congress decided to kind of back off of this, so it's not been changed. So this has created kind of a quandary, right? So for those who are uncomfortable still continuing to use this subject heading, and it for different reasons, right? For this one, I think that some just kind of don't like the word aliens, right? Because it conjures up the little green men, but also the word illegal is probably the big one, right? That's essentially what this is saying, is that it's saying that a group of people is illegal. Okay, the focus is on more kind of the people as opposed to an action, right? You can act in an illegal way, but you as a person shouldn't be described as being illegal. Okay, so yeah, so there was much offense, right? Understandably, over this. So if you're interested in this, I mean, there is a documentary called "Change the Subject" that chronicles this this group of students and their work on this. That it's just a great documentary. Period. I mean, even if you're not super interested in the topic itself, which since you're here, I'm assuming you would be. Um, it's just a really fantastic documentary that I highly recommend that you watch if you have some time to do so. And it's available for free right now until the 19th of December. So hurry, it's leaving soon from PBS here. But yeah, so just I like I said, I highly recommended to watch it. It's you can see here, it's a little less than an hour long. It's not too long, but it's really well done. So learn more about that there with this documentary. Also, for those who feel like you need to act in your local catalog, even if Library of Congress does not, take a look at this report. So SAC, so this report of the SAC working group, so that's the Subject Analysis Committee within the American Library Association. They did some work to see what others have been doing about this if you do feel like you want to change the illegal aliens subject heading in your catalog. They have this, it's results from a survey conducted from September through October of 2019 and recommendations from alternative vocabularies. Essentially, they're kind of recommendations on what to do, some alternatives in your own catalog if you're able to do that. So once again, you can access this from this link. Sorry, there's an additional H at the very beginning of that. Sorry about that. I do have, by the way, at the end of this PowerPoint, a list of all these sources, okay, all in kind of one place, just so you know. Sorry about that. But I highly recommend that one. That should be interesting. And also, there's issues with classification, as you can imagine, right? So still within kind of the subject cataloging realm. This article is quite interesting, even though it's 2011, but still valid in my opinion. But Hank Esquiado, he talks about this case study of this library that's a kind of a small religious college where the president has asked the library to move works on creationism and intelligent design to the science section. Okay, so and the cataloger was feeling uncomfortable with this, but the author here, Dan, he does a great job at kind of walking through how this kind of comes back to our personal convictions versus the institutional mission. And he talks about how ultimately he believed, kind of looking at like the American Library Association Code of Ethics and deciding that ultimately the institutional's mission was in this context more important than his own personal, not his, but the person in question, not the author of the article, but those in this position at the library, was more important than that person's own personal opinions on the matter. Okay, that we need to place our institutional mission above our personal preferences. So there's just a really interesting article kind of thinking through these issues of categorization and kind of what we privilege in terms of what we do for institutional versus individual convictions. But I also want to point out that it's not just like subject headings and classification that can provide ethical conundrums, right, for us. So some of you may be aware of this article, this study, What's Gender Got to Do with It? A Critique of RDA 9.7. It discusses the ethical issues surrounding the inclusion of gender information in authority records. And they make the arguments, using the lens of queer theory to show that it's actually can be quite harmful to include gender information. It used to be that RDA said to, or at least through NACO, the instruction said to, if you include this, put like male, female, or not known as the gender, which is exclusionary of those who may not fit within that binary, and etc. So, and so once again, it's a great article kind of talking about the issues associated with this, with the inclusion of this, and they recommend just not even including this. Like, this is not something that we should even include because it can be very harmful to creators and just downright incorrect, right? And kind of invading their privacy. So there's all sorts of kind of a host of ethical issues that may arise from in recording gender. And other articles like this one is also fantastic. It's changing depictions of persons in library practice. That just came out a few years ago. Discusses the gender issue as well, but just in terms of describing people, just generally in authority records can be problematic, right? Because for those who have looked at authority records anytime recently, sometimes it includes some very personal information. So beyond just gender, obviously includes like date of birth, date of death, also other information that's useful for identification, but may once again be incorrect, may violate the person's privacy. So we really have to be thinking about what is our duty, right? So what is our obligation to people in terms of this idea? Yes, we want to identify them, right, for the sake of authority control, but how much information do we really need to have, like in these authority records, for identification purposes? So this is something that we have to discuss as a community, is what is appropriate and what's not. In addition, the actual descriptive cataloging standards themselves can be problematic in terms of what's required, what's not, what's included, and how it should be recorded. I'm a little biased here. Admittedly, this is my former PhD student, Marie McCrory. This is based upon her dissertation research from a few years ago, where she used this domain analysis to look at RDA and to see how well it's actually meeting user needs. I mean, she did look specifically at like music students at a college, like music majors and those taking courses in music. And she wanted to talk to them and study them outside the catalog. Like the catalog, she didn't even want that involved. Okay, so she just wanted to sit down with these students, like in focus groups and interviews, and say, hey, and she just put stuff on the table, like a DVD of a musical, a musical score, a sound recording of music. It's okay, tell me how you would describe this and how best for would it be for you to find this? Okay, what kind of terminology, what kind of categories of description would be helpful for you? And she found that even though RDA does, which RDA doesn't really require very much, period, but what it does say to use for description of these resources, yes, it does have some things, but not everything. It doesn't actually capture all of the description that the users actually want to see in the catalog. So, so it was a really nice kind of depiction of how our descriptive cataloging standards aren't also that user friendly in a sense. And once again, if we think about in terms of like meeting user needs and access as being kind of values that are important to us as part of our kind of ethical framework, that's a problem, right? That's a problem. Same thing with like children, right? This is another great article that came out a few years ago about the problems with describing resources for children, how we currently do that in cataloging, and how it's just not sufficient for allowing children to find resources in the way that they think about it, right? In the way they want to search. So once again, really great article on how we can maybe try to improve the way we describe materials so that children can more easily access them. So, and once again, that not only applies to like subjects, right, the subject headings and classification, but also our descriptive standards as well. So once again, I could go on. I mean, there's a lot of these. There's a lot of studies that have been done, a lot of discussion of what is a cataloging issue. And like I said, I'm hoping to convince you that there are many, really all of what we do can be can provide an ethical issue, okay, where we have values that conflict. And I want us to be thinking about this and kind of infusing this in the way we think about our work, as opposed to just kind of a burden like, oh, I already have so much to do already. Right? I have too much work to do already. I don't want to have to be thinking about this in every single thing that I do. But I think that it takes some practice and just kind of, once again, kind of just awareness of what could be problematic, to kind of change the way that we think about a work that will then ultimately be beneficial in general for our users. It will be better for everyone, essentially, to be kind of thinking about our work to a more ethical frame. Okay, so and I'm gonna have some suggestions on how we can do this. Okay, so first of all, to be kind of a more ethical minded cataloger and ethical minded cataloging is to just be more aware. Okay, kind of educate yourself and just be more aware of what kind of ethical issues may arise in our work. Okay, and so part of that, I think, some of you know, right, in your experience, right, you know this, right, just by doing this work, this is coming up. But I think just kind of reading widely on what others are thinking about this, others' experiences, I think is really important. I do maintain a cataloging ethics bibliography, a list of various works, old and new. I need to update it now. I'm sure there's more things that have come out, but I try as much as possible in this bibliography. You just kind of go to this link and it's a Google document. I try to include as much as possible links to most of them are articles that you can access for free. Okay, some of them you can't obviously, but there's still quite a bit that is accessible on the open web. And I think for some of them, if you're interested in like it's an article, oftentimes if you just email the author, they'll send you the article. I know that that's for me, like I'm happy to send my article to anyone who asks there. So just keep that in mind, that if there's something you're interested in, you can find it somehow. So that's the first step, I think, just kind of looking inward at yourself and kind of trying to think through your own biases and look at what other experiences are out there in the cataloging realm. Also, just in terms of your institution, just you need to dig deeper into the needs of your user community. And I talk about this in an article I wrote a few years ago. This is just one thing of many I suggest is conducting user studies, right? I think that sometimes we just assume that if we're following standards, that we're just following our local institutions' policies, that we're meeting our user needs and acting ethically. And I don't think that we should always make that assumption. As we've talked about, our cataloging standards are biased. They are. And so we need to really, communicate. We need to talk with our users and get to know them, not just assume that what we're doing now is meeting their needs. Okay, so think beyond the standards and study your users' experience with the catalog. What do they want? What information do they want? What experiences do they want or need that are not offered? And how can you afford to meet those needs if possible? Because that's obviously going to be a consideration is affordability here, because don't have a limited amount of money. So I once again, I have further suggestions in this article that hopefully can still be accessed. I had like 50 free copies there through the publisher. But if not, like I said, just email me if you want a copy of this defining, assessing, and rethinking quality cataloging article, because I talk a bit about some ways that we can do this to kind of better meet our user needs. And then also, once again, some of you have kind of talked about in the chat how you can try to change standards. And in one that I've used, the cataloging lab, allows you kind of in the kind of a crowdsourced way to do this. Okay, so they go beyond Library of Congress subject headings, but that's kind of their primary focus, is helping those who are interested in either adding or modifying Library of Congress subject headings to kind of work together, right? So you work together to put together a subject heading proposal, right? Which takes time. You have to do quite a bit of research to do that, but you kind of work together to do that research and put together the proposal. And sometimes this group is a bit more active than other times, but I do highly recommend, if you're interested in this, to check out this website. I did have two of my students last fall. I taught a subject analysis class, and one of their projects was to work in the cataloging lab to put in a proposal to either add or change a subject heading. And two of my students, Shirley and Faye, they worked on this Library of Congress subject heading for sex change, and they got it approved. It was really awesome. It was beyond the end of the semester, but they kept at it and they did all this research, and they put in let's see, the news that they have it on the screen here. This is from the cataloging lab. New subject heading proposal for transition gender. And then there's a bunch of other ones as well. It says that we're making a proposal to split sex change into two related terms gender reassignment surgery, and hormone therapy gender transition. So, and they took, once again, it was the work that was initiated by, it looks like these Washington iSchool students, but they're the ones that ended up kind of getting it done. So I know, right, Christopher? I'm like, yes, I was so proud of them. I was like crying. I'm like, oh my God, you guys are so awesome. I mean, these are just two of my students, right? So who are just awesome. I don't want to, make it seem like, oh, they're just little students, because they're fantastic. But I think this just goes to show you that, like, if you put in the effort, you can do this. You can totally get Library of Congress to change something that you feel needs to be changed. Okay, for whatever reason. Okay, as long as you do the research. Okay, so proof. There you go, proof. Yeah, they're fantastic. Okay, so also, in addition to doing that work with helping to change standards, which you can do, we're also, like I said, we have a cataloging code of ethics coming out soon. Fingers crossed, this will be out very soon. We're in the final stages. We just have some people looking at the final document right now to provide some additional feedback. But you'll have a cataloging code of ethics here soon. Okay, you can look at how we're doing, like our updates on what we're doing. This website, this is our Cataloging Ethics Steering Committee official website. Like I said, I am the co-chair of this committee. That we try to make it a bit more international, even though Beth and I are obviously in the United States, but we have one member who works for the University of Toronto in Canada, Chan. We have a couple members from the UK, so Jane Daniels in Wales and Diane Pennington in Scotland, and then a public library cataloger, Sarah Ferger, on the committee as well. But we, we knew that we needed help beyond our little committee, so we solicited volunteers for working groups that really, they did a lot of research. They provided a lot of great feedback on what we should include in this cataloging ethics document, and we put this, multiple drafts out there for community feedback on a Google document. I'm hoping that at least some of you all remember this. Maybe you even contributed some feedback on these documents. It was kind of over the summer and then early fall. We had the drafts out for community feedback, and it's because we really wanted this document to be, community driven, and had, a lot of voices involved in creating the document. So we did come up with, our own kind of list of cataloging values. Beyond, I think some of this includes beyond, right? What, like IFLA was saying, what American Library Association was saying in terms of actual values. And so based upon, once again, the feedback we received from the community, from working groups, this is what we felt were kind of the key values that kind of underpin our ethical principle statements, statements of ethical principles that we have, that you can kind of see here that, yeah, it has our the usual suspects, right? So access, acknowledging bias, right? But we also felt it was critically important to include like advocacy, right? Advocating for the cataloging profession in our work, collaborating, right? So collaborating with each other, as well as, those outside of the cataloging sphere, right? Education and training, right? So once again, we had some people argue, like, how is that an ethical issue? And we felt like that was something that is really important to be, an ethical cataloger, is to emphasize, educating yourself and helping educate others, and training as well. And also, so I'm going to kind of move, and this is just kind of, like I said, just still the draft. But here are, I just want to kind of point out, this is kind of the latest version of the draft statements of ethical principles that we've come up with. It's actually just as of yesterday, we modified it slightly, but this is basically it. But I just wanted to highlight a few things, like, so for example, number 4 here on the slide, we support efforts to make standards and tools financially, intellectually, and technologically accessible to all catalogers, and developed with evidence-based research and stakeholder input. This is not something that we have found in other, like, ethical documents that we felt was very important. So not only do we need to try to make, our resources accessible, but our standards need to be as well. And we thought that we would get at least some snarky comments or pushback from like the RDA steering committee or something, because this was kind of developed with kind of that in mind, how RDA has I mean, just becoming all sorts of not accessible in terms of either like financially and also intellectually, quite frankly, accessible, and that's a problem in our opinion. That's an ethical issue in our opinion. So we are kind of taking a stand here with certain things that may not everyone will necessarily agree with, but we're hoping it will at least start a good conversation around these issues that needs to be had. Okay, so like I said, just be on the lookout. Once we kind of have the final document ready for, I'm hoping, like American Library Association and CILIP, right, the British Library Association, we're hoping that they will adopt this document, but we'll see. That's going to be our big task for next year. But be on the lookout for that. But we'll yeah, be on the lookout for that. In addition to the statements, we're also hoping is a kind of a separate document to have case studies associated with each of the statements of ethical principles. So here's just one that we had in kind of the initial draft of the statements relating to bias and subject heading. So kind of like what we just talked about with illegal aliens. So kind of what is the situation, and here's like a possible solution. So once again, we're hoping to kind of crowdsource this and have a place where we can have a bunch of these case studies where people can read, okay, here's an issue, and here's some ways that might be a way to either resolve it or deal with it in some way. Okay, so we'll be once again kind of soliciting feedback on that as well. Here's just another one that we had in the initial draft of this document. This is respecting an individual's right to privacy when creating name authority records. So is the title of this one, but it may change, right? So this is once again another task that we plan to tackle once the actual statements are done. So once again, be on the lookout for that. We'd appreciate any help that you are able to offer in that regard. So final thoughts, and then let's talk. Okay, so some final thoughts for me is I wanted to highlight this phrase, this sentence from the ALA Code of Ethics, that ethical dilemmas occur when values are in conflict. Okay, so we really have to think through as a community is that deeply about what we value. Okay, so I've already provided some suggestions on what, at least from my research and my work with the Cataloging Ethics Steering Committee, what we value in the cataloging, profession. Okay, but then we have to think about, okay, well, it's one thing to kind of list, what we value, but there's always going to be a conflict, right? So like going back to this, the illegal aliens, conflict. That one is a conflict between, like following standards and also this idea of being, respectful and inclusive, right? So we still may believe that those two values are important, but they both can't win out, right? We have to kind of choose one or the other. So we have to think about the level, not only what we value, but the level of importance of each value, okay? And how much we really want to kind of go to bat to make sure that we, are acting as ethical as possible with these values in this situation. Also, this kind of idea of distinguishing between our personal convictions and professional duties can be very difficult sometimes, right? So, So, Liza, you're talking about cataloger's judgment, right? It's not like there's an easy, this is definitely right and this is definitely wrong. Like sometimes your personal convictions will not match up to your professional duties. Okay, so there's going to be some gray areas here. That's just, it's inevitable. Okay, so we have to think about, okay, what is the nuance? What can we do to maybe not make this situation perfect? Because I don't think there's necessarily always going to be a perfect solution, but we do have to think about what can we do that can best meet the needs of our users and be also financially doable and personally doable, and etc. So, but then finally, and this is something I'm going to continue to explore, this idea of a cataloging butterfly effect. right? So even those who feel like, okay, well, not everything, right? Not everything in cataloging is an ethical issue, right? And when I type in, a date, a publication date into my MARC record, and I accidentally make a typo, right? Is that really, an ethical issue? And I would argue maybe not in and of itself is an ethical issue, but it could cause one ultimately in the long run, right? What may seem like a minor non-ethical issue may become part of a kind of a larger ethical issue over time. Okay, so kind of that idea of kind of the small little beat of a butterfly's wing, the air movement that creates may create a tsunami right on the other side of the world. So once again, think about it in terms of, okay, what am I doing and how this might create an ethical issue in the future. So really kind of try to have this idea that ethics kind of infuses kind of your thinking about your work. And if you get in the habit of it, it does become easier. I think that will help you in terms of making decisions as well. Okay, and kind of like, well, should I just wait to do this, or kind of put it off until some other time and do it now? And so um, I do think that this will kind of provide a good kind of framework in thinking about what we do. So, and I just noticed, yeah, so like Ian, you're saying that sometimes your values are dictated by a board of directors. And yeah, and sometimes that's the case, right? And so going back to that article I was talking about with like, the creationism versus, putting that in science, et cetera. And sometimes there's, if that's not part of your personal conviction, that can be problematic, right? But sometimes there's not really much we can do about that except perhaps advocate if we feel strongly that like the board of directors is not correct in this situation. It's I think part of our duty essentially to advocate for what we think is best, right? So I want to get your thoughts. I'm here, like I said, on my slides. I have information on upcoming webinars, obviously, that you can find that out, as well as, like I said, I have all these links, citations rather, to what I've talked about here today. That's like some of this you can just access online, some not. But anyway, thoughts? Yeah, I know I've kind of thrown a lot at you. So, okay, so Janet, like regarding RDA, yes, so RDA, there are financial, right? So first of all, it's expensive to have RDA if you have it on, because you have to keep paying for it every year, right? A subscription. But also, we're arguing that RDA, and not just us, but many people are arguing that RDA is not intellectually accessible either. The way it is now, the new RDA is written. If you've been able to look at the beta, it's incomprehensible. So it's not based on like user studies. So and for us, we argue that is not acceptable ethically, right? Because it's going to create some tiers, right? So those institutions that can afford RDA, will have more access to these standards and be able to use these standards in ways that those who don't have access cannot. So, yeah. Any other? Oh, Dale, like we obtained the. Oh, I don't know. I found that on the internet. I would love to have one of these buttons. I'm sure that you can find maybe some place online or something that can create one for you. It's a great sentiment, cataloging of public service. Okay. Yeah, research the button. It's a good button. Okay. Any final thoughts? I have that it's a minute left. Any kind of final thoughts on this? I hope this has been helpful and kind of thinking through like kind of what is cataloging ethics and what you can be doing if you feel strongly about any of these issues. So yeah, good. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so like I said, try to keep up if you can on what we're doing with the cataloging ethics steering committee, and be on that lookout for the documents, because we could use some help with the case studies. It's going to be going to be an interesting process. So anyway, okay, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming today and having this conversation with me. And take care. And like I said, please feel free to email me if you do have any thoughts or questions.
Thank you, Dr. Karen Snow, for an informative webinar. Attendees, if you enjoyed this webinar, we ask that you join us on January 7th for Karen's next webinar, Introduction to Library of Congress Subject Headings. As always, we encourage you to keep an eye on the Swiftland CE calendar, the Swiftland Facebook page, or your message from the listserv. Thank you everyone for attending and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Taylor.
Deb.
Thanks,
Thank you, Karen.
Deb.